With Mama long gone and Daddy away on business trips often, Grandma Verona took it upon herself to raise us as good-willed, God-fearing children. And she succeeded, at least as far as I went. All the stories she'd narrate about hell and the terrifying abominations that awaited us there, lest we didn't abandon our misbehaving bratty ways, kept me sufficiently scared. I prayed every night before bed, finished all my green peas, and never cussed. Hell scared me, and if heeding to Grandma's words kept me safe, I was happy to comply. My younger brother Jimmy, though, he kept being a brat. Grandma's hellish tales amused him. He called those stories bullshit, straight to her face. Even cussing aside, he and his best friend Davy never ceased from making trouble. Jimmy and Davy would chop off my doll's pigtails, pluck fruits off the neighbors' trees, chase the stray dogs away with sticks and stones. Essentially, they did all the things Grandma Verona didn't approve of. Suffice to say, she'd get mad. Never laid a finger on Davy, but after each one of their antics, she'd welcome my brother back home with some crude punishment or another. Spank him on the rear with her long bamboo cane, shut him up in the attic for half a day, make him scrub the toilets. You know, it's classic old people punishment stuff. Made me watch too, probably to send a message. But watching my brat little brother succumb and squeal in fear only made me giggle. Later she'd make up for her craziness with a nice pancake dinner for the two of us. She'd serve them with warm hugs and forehead kisses that'd make us both happy. Shortly after, Jimmy would revert to his insufferable ways, and that's how the cycle kept running. Of course, it had to stop someday. That day came when Jimmy nibbled off a leg piece of the Thanksgiving dinner turkey Grandma and I had prepped. When confronted, he lied, which only riled her more. Hell, riled me too. We had been working hard on stuffing and decorating the bird, and frankly, I was getting a little sick of my 9-year-old brother's misbehavior. Not as sick as Grandma, though. She had conjured a rather cruel, novel punishment for my brat brother. Jimmy didn't seem much scared when Grandma gripped his hands, but once he realized where we were headed to, he started flailing wild. You see, my brother literally never showered, claimed that the water clogged his ears real bad, made him feel like drowning or something. We both knew it was just one of his white lies. And Grandma never made much of a fuss about it, but at that particular moment, we dragged my wildly screeching brother to the pond in our backyard. There was something strangely poetic about the whole ordeal. "Liar, liar, pants on fire. This ought to quell your bad lying ways, boy," she said before dousing Jimmy's head into the cold water. I know. What kind of a monster grandmother tries to waterboard her grandson, and what a shitty sister I must have been to support her. Well, as far as my 10-year-old self knew back then, Grandma was just trying to pour some reverence into his thick skull. She was smiling after all. She had to be knowing what she was doing, and at some point, she pulled him back up, and he made a shrieking sound like a girl. Sounds cruel, but hearing his shrill, effeminate squeals, they made me chuckle. And believe me, Jimmy had been super irksome lately. It was nasty the way he and Davy had ripped my beloved Dolly's blue hair to shreds. He had this one coming, and so I continued enjoying the music of his shrills, as Grandma kept his head dunks flowing. It wasn't until his screams stopped that we realized we might have gone a bit too far. Grandma pulled him back, but he had stopped flailing. She shook him vigorously. Hell, I did too. But he just wouldn't stir. 5 whole minutes of shaking later, we tried CPR, half expecting Jimmy to open his mischievous blue eyes and yell, "Gotcha!" at our anxious faces. He stayed silent, though. Grandma checked his pulse. That, too, refused to answer. Jimmy was gone. The mere sight of my formerly nimble-footed brother was just laying at the pond side, bloat-faced, unmoving and silent, warding off all pragmatism out of my head. Fear and terror had gripped my head, much so that the thought of alerting the meds didn't even pass my mind. Grandma Verona probably felt the same as I did, except she had an extra emotional baggage of guilt to deal with. Jimmy, now don't you try pulling over one on your grandma. You wake up." That's all she kept saying, crying until her voice broke down. Minutes flowed like hours, but we just sat there silent, contemplating our next move, still waiting for the grief to wash over us. Grandma Verona finally shifted, possibly getting up to break the news to my father. I did too. And then, the pond started to bubble. Grandma turned her head with a jolt. I followed her suit, and then we both faced the creature that emerged from the water. A human-like female creature, what with her long, flowing white tresses, lilac gown, fair skin, and whatnot. Her pitch-black eyes were what lent her an otherworldly appearance. Even before we could react, she spoke, her voice as alluring as a siren. "Say, I think you just dropped your little Jimmy in the water. He doesn't happen to be this Jimmy, does he now?" As she finished, as if on cue, another entity bobbed up to the surface. Except this was no otherworldly entity, no. The matted blonde hair, the slightly tanned skin, the dreamy blue eyes that reflected a lost innocence. This entity we were facing? It was our Jimmy. Grandma Verona seemed to be choking on her words. The lady from the water must have noticed her dilemma, so she turned her eyes upon me. "Well, little Rosie, is this your Jimmy?" A child's minds are wild. I couldn't think of alerting the medics when I needed to, but at that moment, that pond lady charged me with her question. My mind wandered off to one of the stories I had heard my grandma tell at church. The story of the woodcutter and his wooden axe. "Well, no," I began. Jimmy never combed his hair, and his shirt wasn't neatly tucked in his pants, and I wasn't just being earnest for the sake of it. There was something about this Jimmy that didn't seem right. His blue eyes didn't have any of that mischief I'd come to associate with my brother. Child's minds know a stranger when they see them. And this boy in the pond? Well, hell, he was one of them. The pond lady frowned. "This is not your Jimmy." "Well, now that's a shame. The boy here kept begging me to take him back to his grandma Verona and little Rosie. A no-good liar. That's what he is." "Well, so long then, Grandma slapped a palm over my mouth. "Oh, that is our dear Jimmy, all right. Rosie here, well, she's just being naughty. Children these days always trying to pull one over us oldies. Ain't I correct?" Her voice had a strange sense of calm. "Oh, you no good Jimmy boy. Won't quit horsing around, would you? Oh, but it's all forgotten. Say, how would you and little Rosie like a plate of one of them hot pancakes, eh?" Pond lady smiled. "Go on then, Jimmy. We won't keep you waiting on your grandma's pancakes now, would I?" Jimmy smiled and silently walked over to the surface. With her job seemingly done, the pond lady dove back into the water. Grandma Verona walked over and hugged him, telling her how sorry she was. She then ruffled both of our hair and walked us to the house for her pancakes. I cast one good look back at the pond's edge where, not too long ago, my real brother lay unconscious. But there was nothing. I didn't see no body. None of us gonna talk about anything that had happened today. Grandma Verona's whispering voice had an icy edge in my ears. Am I clear? I nodded. We had Jimmy back, and that was all that mattered. Now a week passed, but Grandma Verona, well, she no longer gave Jimmy a hard time. But I doubt it had anything to do with what we weren't supposed to remember. This Jimmy, who had been resurfaced from the pond, he said all his prayers before we dined, studied his class lessons every night, and even helped Grandma and me with the dinner. Well, it's like he had been baptized, Grandma would playfully tease once she'd hymned him to sleep. As a rather gullible 10-year-old girl, I was unsure what to make of the whole baptized brothers situation. Now and then, as I looked him on the table, finishing all his green peas and vegetables without complaining, I'd get a strange feeling in my head. You see, something was awry. I knew it. But then again, I had no wishes of going against Grandma Verona's words. I was, after all, still scared that disobeying her would damn me to hell. Eventually, though, I let my guard down when my brother birthday gifted me a cute blue woolen wig for my bald dolly's head. Stitched it all by myself. I nicked my finger, he showed. Well now, bro, I squealed over a hug. What's the idea behind this sudden change into the best brother ever? He smiled. You're good, Rosie. You pray to Jesus, you don't cuss. I just like good people. I could trust them. He patted me on the back. Stay good. Stay honest, Rosie. Always. Now 11-year-old me smiled and hugged him back, failing to take note of the red flags that were popping up. But I did, eventually. One morning as I was leaving for my choir practice, I caught a glimpse of Davy's wild giggles coming from Jimmy's room. He'd been quiet a while since I'd seen the two monkeying around like they did. Who cared, though? Boys are weird anyway. I wished Grandma good morning, and I left for my practice. I returned in the afternoon, tagging my choir mate Nancy along with me. But when we entered my room, Jimmy was sitting on my bed. His chum Davy stood next to him. Jimmy, what the? Don't say it, Rosie. This is a holy house. We don't spew vulgarities around here. Nancy gave me a quizzical look. Jimmy, I asked, what are you and Davy doing in my room? Davy has something to tell you, sister. I looked at Davy, standing still as a rock, his eyes facing the hard wooden floor. Now what is it that you want to say? I'm sorry for ruining your dolly, Daisy. I sinned, but do not worry, for I have atoned adequately. He looked up to face me. Something about his eyes, though, seemed off. But I still need to know that I'm worthy of your forgiveness, Rose Matthews. Am I? Yeah, I forgive you, I said, perplexed. You two can leave now. Which they did. But not before Davy looked back and said, Thank you, Rosie. It takes an angel's heart to bless former sinners like me. He shut the door. Nancy teased me that Davy was trying to flirt. I smiled, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of something not being quite right. Nancy was going to spend the evening, so we had a lot of fun games planned up, and after a while, though, we got bored of playing Hasbro's Sorry. And that's when Nancy came up with the fun idea of prank calling our classmates. Now I won't bore you with all the cheesy details. Nancy dialed one of our dorky classmates named Travis Penn and lied that she wanted to date him. And much to our amusement, Travis couldn't see through our ruse and ended up confirming the next weekend free. Soon after hanging up, we burst into a squeaky schoolgirl laughter. We were just prepping for fake ordering a pizza when a domineering voice startled us. "How does it please you to shatter someone's weak heart with a lie?" We looked over. Jimmy was standing at the doorway, his arms crossed. "Jesus, Jimmy, you scared the Christ out of us." "God, what is up with you today?" "Now do not take the Lord's name in vain, Rosie, lest you want to end up like your sinner friend here." His fingers were pointed at Nancy. "Oh, give it a rest, Reverend douchebag," Nancy hit back. We both giggled. Jimmy left, prompting us to laugh louder. Night came soon after, and Nancy and I soon drifted off in my room. Midway through my sleep, a faint splashing sound woke me up. You know how these scenes work like this. Rubbed my eyes, didn't find Nancy in her sleeping bag. I wondered where she was. Heard another splash, and I looked at the window. Yada, 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 right? I'll skip straight to what I saw from that window. I saw Jimmy trying to hold down a struggling body against the pond's surface. Even before I could call any names, the struggle ended, and the limp body sank into the water. Seconds later, it rose upon the surface, her face visible this time. Nancy's face. My heart froze as I watched my brother hand Nancy some towels to wipe herself. After she was done, they did a small bow down at the pond's edge before heading back indoors. I would have rushed the grandma that very instant, were it not for Nancy quietly opening the door to my room. And for as naive as I was, something in my head advised me against comforting her at this hour of the night. "Let angels bless our dreams, Rose Matthews," I heard Nancy say. Now, winter solstice had just passed, but in my 11 years growing up, that was undoubtedly the longest night of my life. I bid Nancy a quick farewell the next morning, which wasn't hard to do, considering she had to bask in the Lord's glory in church. First time in my 4 years of knowing her that I had heard her say something like that. And soon after she left, I bolted for Grandma's room. "Grandma, wake up. There's something seriously wrong going on with our pond." "Jesus H. Christ, Rosie, can't you give me..." "Wait, what's this about the pond?" I told her everything, opinionating as much as my young brain had been able to process. This baptized Jimmy, who was living as my brother, he was pious. Otherworldly pious, so much that he'd resort to purify everything uncouth around him, and by drowning those said uncouth objects in our backyard pond, trading them off for the pious entities the pond lady had to offer. He made 2 human trades already, Davy and Nancy, and unless we addressed the matter, that toll would only climb. Grandma Verona stayed silent for the longest while before uttering, "Well, you're just jealous that Jesus loves him more than he does you, ain't you? And he does, Rosie. Let me be clear about that. Jesus doesn't as much bat a second eye for jealous, crazy girls like you, talking all nonsense about your own little brother. And what did he tell you about the pond? I mean, honest to God, girl, you have..." What had I been thinking? Of course, she wouldn't help. It was up to me to stop my brother. I grabbed Grandma's mobile phone off her counter, barely managing to avoid her grip as I shut the door to her room. called Jerome. Her son, my daddy. No signal, obviously. Now I had to think on my feet. Outdoor reception was better out in the backyard, and so that's where I rushed. The call connected and just started to ring when a pair of hands snatched the phones from my hands. "Grandma, please. You know this ain't real. We cannot..." "I valued your honesty, Rosie. Why would you ever betray me?" I turned, adrenaline coursing wild through my heart. It wasn't Grandma Verona. It was my little brother. "Jimmy, please, stop what you're doing. This isn't you, drowning innocent people. You're the... Oh, dear Lord, pardon me. You are darn right, Rosie. I'm not the Jimmy who kept tormenting the world with this unholy Christ-defying shenanigans and whatnot. I am something much better. Something this world desperately needed. And so are you. You, Rosie. We didn't need to drown you to cleanse you of all your sins. Loyal, honest, loving. You were perfect, Rosie. I guess that's why you faltered, sister. I should have known. Even the perfect match burns out someday. But that'd be a shame now, wouldn't it?" An ice-cold grin upon his face. "How about we douse you instead?" Now I was dumb. Dumb enough to have walked right into Jimmy's watery trap. I was weak, so weak that I wasn't unable to resist my 2-year younger brother's vice grip on my neck as he pushed me into the pond's chilling water. And as my head descended the chilling water surface, I could see the pond lady, purity brimming in her pitch-black eyes as she held up the wholly dead-eyed version of me, Rose Matthews, who would join Jimmy, Davy, and Nancy to make this world a much better place. She smiled at me, this Rosie, a smile benign of any happiness. That is when I realized she was perfect. The shortness of breath soon started to drown out my consciousness. I could feel the other Rosie's palms on my face, sinking me deeper and deeper as she tried to make her way up to the surface. Jimmy's grip was still iron strong on the other side, drowning out the final bits of my unholy life out in the muddy water. I could feel her now, the other me, just about to raise her head above the water, replacing me for good. I had no choice but to accept. Not with my brother's strangle over my near-dead body. A loud gunshot broke me off my swift-flowing train of thoughts. I felt the plunging grip on my neck loosen, soon replaced by a tug that pulled me out of the water. The breath of hot pancakes filled in my conscience, just like the ones Grandma Verona used to bake us after a day of Jimmy's insufferable antics. And slowly my eyes opened, vision cleared. Jimmy's limp body was afloat on the pond's surface. Grandma Verona was facing me, a pistol aimed at her left temple. "I'm sorry, Rosie. It's all my fault. Unholy souls like me have no right to live. But you, Rose Matthews, you are one honest and holy soul." A sad smile on her face, tears in her eyes. "Always stay that way." My screams of no were cut short by an ear-deafening gunshot as Grandma blew her brains off, the sound of her limp body splashing on the pond punctuating her sentence. And I sat there, head leaning against a tree, half crying, half coughing the water out of my system, as I watched my brother and my grandmother's corpses sink into the pond. Seconds later, the surface bubbled, and I was greeted by the pond lady, holding up Grandma and Jimmy's body by the hair. "Say, Rosie, an old woman and a young boy just dropped by my waters. They don't happen to look anything like 'em unholy bodies over here." The dead faces gaped with their mouths open at me. "Do they?" I screamed and dashed back into the house, the pond lady's sickening cackle accelerating my steps. Now, Daddy returned home that same evening, found me shivering in my room, heard my story, called the cops to recover all the bodies from the pond, and sure, they were skeptical, what with an 11-year-old girl constantly telling that some pond lady took the corpses with her. But still, on my repeated insistence, they didn't send in any divers, and just used manual machinery for the process. They didn't find no corpses. Neither did they find my fingerprints on Grandma's gun, so I wasn't culpable for her or Jimmy's disappearance in any way. A detective brought in both Nancy and Davy for questioning, so that pretty much refuted my claims of Jimmy drowning them. The dead-eyed, friendly looks they gave me as they left the room still gives me chills to this very day. My daddy moved with me to his office apartment in the city, which is where I spent the next 9 years of my life growing up. Before leaving Grandma's country house, though, we poured a layer of kerosene on the pond's water and flicked in a few burning matches. I have no clue if that destroyed the pond. Heck, I don't even know if someone brought Grandma's house, and I don't want nothing to do with that place. Neither does Daddy ever force me to. He misses his mother and son a lot, but my therapist discouraged him from prying too much. "Still sticking with that pond lady story, huh?" I once overheard him say. Now, I'm not saying she's lying, but I believe the lesser we bring these tragic events up, the better. Although he does occasionally tell me of what has happened in my old town. They're very uptight, wholly conservative people coming up there. Davy and Nancy run the church. Grandma always said they were a wild bunch of kids, didn't she? Geez, I wonder how they do it. Not a question I want to think much about. I graduated law school and I am a practicing attorney now. You know what they say about that kind of job. It's all about painting lies and half-truths and fact. And I do lie. I lie a lot. But then every night I seek forgiveness to the Holy Lord, thanks to Grandma Verona's young age grooming. I'm not perfect, though. Sometimes I forget, and on those nights as I prepare to immerse myself in the bathtub, I see the water surface foam up in the middle, and then I'm reminded of my late grandma and my brother, and how a single white lie cost them their lives. The thought horrifies me, brings me back memories of the pond lady's sickening cackle. And nights like those are when I grab my Bible from the shelf and pray to my Lord to forgive me for my uncouth lies.